Hey, Stephen Priest with Class1ModelWorks.com. We're in the shop today and we're going to be talking about weathering the GSC flat cars. And then after we've weathered the cars, we're going to be adding some loads to them. So we need to think about what we're doing with the juxtaposition or the loads and the weathering, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a timeline. In other words, we're trying to create a story with the cars that actually didn't happen, but we're trying to quote unquote model the story with what we do with the cars. In other words, the cars are out living their lives years before the Transformers or whatever were made, and they're getting dirty and old and weathered. And then lo and behold, they get assigned a Transformer load, and the Transformer load comes and gets assigned to a particular car. And so we're going to have a weathered car with a relatively new load. And you can also do the opposite, like the older Transformer here. You could put the older Transformer on a new car. So what you're doing by doing this is you're actually creating a modeling timeline. You're saying the car is older or the Transformer is older by how each object is weathered. And so the idea behind that is you're creating an artificial timeline. Of course, both models are models and they're made at the same time, but we want to create that narrative, that story behind modeling. And you do that by interjecting weathering and some other just slight things that we're going to talk about as well during this process. So first out the gate, we're going to talk about weathering. All kinds of weathering, and we're going to use several forms of weathering on these cars. We're going to use airbrush. We're going to use these panel line made by Tamiya. The panel line accent, they make a gray, a rust, a black, and then we're going to also be using some of this AK odorless thinner, which we use to thin this down and make it flow into the cracks. So we're going to be using a whole bunch of things. On top of that, we're going to take at least one of these cars and we're going to add damage to the deck. In other words, we're going to add all the welded on beams and things onto the deck, which was very common with these cars. Loads will be secured by welding I-beams or H-columns or whatever to the deck, or pipe or whatever. And then when the loads were removed, they just simply cut off the H-columns or I-beams or whatever angles or whatever form of steel. And so the decks would tend to be a plethora of remnants of metal shapes. And then the next load, whoever is loading would have to go in and grind all that off, angle grind it off, cut it off, and prepare the surface for the next load. So we're going to do that on one of these cars because it's very, very interesting and very realistic and makes a fantastic hint at the history of the car itself. So we're going to weather several cars at once, and the process of weathering, really what happens to a car is two things happen. The paint gets lighter or it gets darker, and then you get a lot of kick up of external elements, basically sand, dirt, dust to the car, and that all tends to take all the paint and make it less visible, the lettering less readable. It tends to kind of blur things into kind of a gray or kind of a sand, whatever direction you're wanting to weather. And I'll show you basically how we do that. So you've got a nice, really clean car here, and we're gonna start by just doing a little bit of what I would just call fading of the paint. So obviously the paint on this car is kind of a Tuscan color, or kind of a railroad red. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with that type of color, and we're going to just weather it down a little bit, kind of fade it out. So I'm using just it's a Northern Pacific color, but any freight car brown would work. And we just want to make sure it's close in color. You know, notice it's fairly close, so we're going to use that. We're going to thin it a little bit. This happens to be True Color paint. This is acetone that I'm thinning it with. True Color thins with acetone. And we're going to just go in and just kind of lightly knock the color down a little bit. So using a double action airbrush. And we want to make sure we can spray really, really thin and fine. And if you watch the Conrail lettering, you notice like it's starting to get knocked down. You see it? Kind of faded out a little bit. And that's what we're doing here. We're just working with the fading of the lettering on the car. We're also going to hit the trucks a little bit, coupler end a little bit. And again, we're just, the point is to knock the paint down on a little bit. So that's the first round of weathering right there. Fairly simple, fairly subtle. There's not a whole lot that went on there, other than we're just knocking knocking the car color down a little bit, with the result of just fading. We're creating fading paint. So like I mentioned earlier, you can go two ways with your paint. You can lighten it or darken it, and just depends on kind of what approach you want to do with your car. This particular car we're going to lighten, so this is the sand color, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of hit the car lightly with it. And what you'll notice, it starts really bringing out the details, especially in the trucks. And you want to be careful with this. You don't want to overdo it, but this allows you to basically get dirt kick up, dust kick up around the car, which just knocks the brand new shiny appearance of the car off the car. So you can see now that the trucks and things are much more interesting. The highlights and the details are shown much clearer. You can see all the roller bearing caps and everything, and it's kind of unified the car as dust will actually do. Dust will kind of make everything the same type of color. It takes it toward one color, so you don't have blacks and then bright yellows. So why I have the dust out, I'm going to do a couple cars. I'm going to go ahead and do the SLF car as well, the Frisco car. This car is very bright and very shiny, and almost toy-like in its appearance. And I'm sure when it was new it looked that way, but yeah, we want the thing to look more realistic, so we're going to go in and we're going to just kind of knock all this down a little bit with this color. There are people out there that like it. Looks like we're going to have to blew that brake wheel on. It looks like I bumped it earlier. There are people out there that like to run brand new cars, and that's okay. I like things that look far more realistic, so I usually tend to run things toward the weathering side a little bit, so your fleet looks more believable and more realistic. So again, you can go overboard with this. I'm going to stop right about there. And then the last car I'm going to do roughly the same thing with the MKT car. Just knock it down with a quick coat of this paint. Now, if you do nothing else to your cars, this is a great place to stop. You know, I mean, it's a great place to start and stop. It'll give you a really nice weathering your car, just doing the sand wash or the the dirt kick up. But we're gonna go a little further with these cars, take them a little further, because we want these cars to look like they've been in service for a few decades, and we want them definitely to look realistic. So we'll be back here in a moment to talk a little bit more about the next phase. So the next color we're going to play with is a weathered black, and I generally make a lot of my own weathered blacks by just adding different mixtures of whites to actual black paint. Because what you're doing, weather black is really kind of gray, so we're messing around with grays. So on the Katie car, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it and just kind of do a light deck wash with this, so it just kind of darkens down a little bit. I'm going to hit the coupler areas. I'm going to hit the ends of the car where we get dirt kick up, and you can already tell that has quite an effect on the end of the car. And of course, this car's been carrying loads and things, so I'm going to kind of spray down onto the deck with some of this dark. Kind of darken it up a little bit. Go to the other end and do kind of the same thing. We're just going to knock it down a little bit, hit the coupler. And the neat thing is when you start doing this, you'll notice that objects like the coupler start blending into the car. So you don't have a coupler that's a color and then a car that's a color. You have the both of them showing tonality in that same range. That's what's nice about the airbrush. And that's what happens in the real world. Objects that are in the real world will get dirty because they're together on the car. So they take off the same type of dirt. So then I'm going to just do kind of a little bit of just kind of some kick off here on the side of the car, some kind of kick up. And again, we have the dust there already, and but now we're adding some of this kind of dark gray to it. So that's where the car is at this point. It's looking pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and do the Frisco car next. The Frisco car, because it's a very light color, I need to be careful about how and where I go with this to the extent, because it's going to get dark really fast. But it's important that we do some of this overspray on it, but we got to be really careful with the amount of it, because again, the dark colors are going to quickly overpower the yellow. So we're going to be using Tester's dull coat to knock the remaining shine off the car. Dull coat is available either in a little spray can, or it's also available in a bottle. I prefer the bottle because I like the control you get with an airbrush. And if you're a modeler, you really ought to seriously think about building an airbrush booth and using airbrushes rather than rattle cans. Rattle cans are okay, but you just don't get the control that you can get with an airbrush. So we've already mixed this up, and it's 50-50, it's thin 50-50. And literally we're just going to go in and hit the car and knock the remaining sheen off. And you'll notice I can really control the amount of dull coat I'm releasing, and you cannot do this with a spray can. A spray can is on or off. It's like a binary thing where it is 1 or 0. And the other nice thing about the thin coat of dull coat like this is it dries almost instantly. So you can spray the car like I just did and then handle it. If you did this with a spray can or rattle can, that wouldn't be the case, because the rattle can obviously puts on a much thicker coat of paint. So same thing next to the Katie car, the MKT car. We're going to knock all the shine off it in the same manner as we did with the Conrail car. And we're talking about the GSC flat cars here, but obviously this applies to any car in your fleet. These same methodologies apply to anything. And you know, you shouldn't have your entire fleet heavily weathered, but you shouldn't have your entire fleet absolutely perfectly clean either. Either way, when you see a train like that, it's unbelievable. And your goal in modeling, hopefully, is to recreate the actual prototype, which is made up of some new cars and some old and dirty cars, and then some in between. So your goal ought to be a balance of weathered cars, non-weathered cars, and that will create a much more believable model railroad. It makes images and photographs you shoot on your railroad more believable, rather than having everything bright and shiny and clean. And it's also a much better representation of the real world, because that's how the real world is. Things get old and beat up. And the other thing about that is that cars themselves are a representation of an era or a time period. And if you're paying attention to whatever era you're modeling, let's say you're modeling 1970, but you have a couple 1950 cars in there. Well, those cars are 20 years old, obviously 50, 60, 70. So their paint ought to reflect that, unless they've been recently repainted. And you have to think about that as well. But weathering and how you control your paint and control your application of weathering really gives your railroad that believable flavor. New cars that were new in 1970 when you model should be clean. Older cars that are 8, 10 years old, most cars that are 8 or 10 years old haven't been repainted yet, so they're getting to the point where they're fairly well weathered. You need to do that just for believability. You can't say I modeled 1970 or whatever date you model, and then have everything that looks like it just rolled out of the paint shop yesterday. That's not a good approach to modeling, because it really isn't modeling. It's just gathering a bunch of stuff together and putting it on a railroad and saying, I modeled 1970. Paint and weathering are a huge portion of believable model, and it's every modeler's kind of duty to learn how to weather to some aspect or to some level to help support and bolster the story of I'm modeling this year. Okay, so the next round is going to get even more interesting and possibly more confusing. We're going to keep the car new. This is an L and AL car, the red and ready cars, which were rebuilt relatively late. So we're going to keep this car new, and we're going to weather the load as if the load had been taken out of service, which is an older transformer. So we're going to take this in the 90s and be pulling out a 1930s or 40s transformer and putting the weathered load on the clean car. So if you remember the last cars we've been doing, they were weathered cars that are going to get clean new loads. In this case, we're flipping that around, new car, an older load. And that's what's so cool about weathering. Again, you create these interesting timelines. You're creating a sequence of events that never happened, but they're strongly hinted at by how you model, how you weather. So we've taken the transformer and we've mounted it with tape onto a box, onto an old Athearn box. Double-sided tape, or in this case we just made a tape loop. And then we're going to put it on this rotating Tamiya stand, and that'll help us paint all sides of this. I'm using a Flocal dark green. Yes, I still have a huge stock of Flocal I've managed to buy and maintain. Love Flocal, but of course it's no longer produced. So what we're going to do, Class1modelworks.com, we deliver this actually in a gray, but a lot of transformers were greens or tans, so we're actually going to paint this green, and then we're going to come back and weather it after it's painted, and so we kind of knock the color down on it a little bit. And of course, obviously, we're going to be modeling this as if it's a transformer coming out of service. So one of the easiest ways to hold smart parts down is just using old box lids or old boxes from Athearn or, you know, whatever brand you may have laying around. Just take some painter's tape, pull it off about 6 inches, take it and roll it over into a loop, and then that gets placed onto the bottom of that, and then your components you're going to be painting, you just stick onto that. It's inexpensive, relatively easy to do, and one of my favorite things, and that is quick. And you can quickly, if you keep all kinds of parts around like I do, or all kinds of boxes rather, you can quickly keep prep to paint. And obviously, you know, one of the things you want to do is in your hobby is you want to be efficient, so you can get a lot done in an afternoon. And so by keeping your old boxes and things around, you can do that. So this is a drum, a dewatering drum. We're going to be painting it next, and it'll require 2 coats of paint, because we'll paint it this way and then we'll flip it over and paint it the other way, because there's really no base to it. The entire thing has to be painted. So we'll get all the top sides and then we'll paint the other side last. A really good color to represent fresh or raw steel is graphite. Some companies call it gunmetal. It's a great place to start because it's kind of a dark silver with a little metal flake in it, and it makes a really nice color for bare metal. And we're going to come back, obviously you'll see in the future here in the next few installments of this, we're going to come back with this and weather it and rust it out. But right now we're starting out with a brand new, super shiny metal drum, like the day it was made in the factory. So got to walk before you run, I guess, and that's going to be the step number 1 is the graphite. So paint this thing and then come back and hit it with rust. So this is blocking. In other words, this is the cribbing that's going to go underneath the load, and we're painting that kind of a wood color, fresh new raw wood color, and that'll be that. These are the bearings. We also painted them graphite, and we'll come back and do a little bit of work on those as well. And again, once we airbrush, we need to let this stuff sit for a couple hours at least before we mess with it again. What I like about the floral wire is it's generally kind of got a green plastic coating on the outside of it. You can see it here. And so it takes paint really well if you want to paint it. Generally, a lot of this this heavy support wire, this is what we're going to use basically to run from the car up to the loads. A lot of the time, this is just bare metal. So we will go back and paint this graphite, the same color as we did the drum earlier, because that's just bare metal color. And then you can rust it, obviously, if the load's been out there a while. So we're going to show you how to drill holes in the deck and to create these guy wires for loads at this point. So we're using some fine floral wire, and the only thing you need to worry about with this is that your floral wire, your drill bit's just a touch larger than it. So whatever side you decide to use, and again, there's no laws or rules on this. The prototypes railroad, you know, they grab whatever stock they've got, or the business that's shipping will grab whatever metal stock they've got and add it to the car to hold the load down. I'm using a Dremel set on a fairly low speed to just take our existing holes, which do go all the way through the car, but just open them up a little bit. So you can take this and quickly knock out some holes. And we're going to use that floral wire then to mount the load right onto the base here. So as we mentioned earlier, this is an actual load, and then there's a base underneath the load that's just for shipping. So we're going to use paint to basically make it recognizable between the actual load and the actual mounting. So I'm using Flocal. I've got some Flocal here, and we're going to take it, and I'm just going to paint. I'm going to paint this base in a Flocal rust. I'm actually using a rough brown, and I'm going to come back with rust and finish it off. And Flocal excellent paint to hand brush with. So in a few moments, this entire base piece will be painted into rust color, just like they were just using this for shipping blocking on the load. So a couple minutes, we'll come back and this will all be painted. So at this point, after the dull coat is kind of set up, we're going to come back with panel line, which is the Tamiya product. And this is not paint, and it's really difficult to get over the fact that this isn't paint, because most of us are used to painting. The idea with this actually is we want to create blobs. We want to just kind of blob it on the deck, and then we want to put so much thinner on it that the thinner allows it to kind of flow all over the place. And the resulting appearance of the car is going to be that of a car that is rusted and or has dirt on it in a very random fashion, which is exactly what we want. And the big key to this is putting lots and lots of the thinner on it. These cars have wood decks, so obviously you don't want to put rust on the wood decks for obvious reasons. But you do want to make sure that all the metal gets hit with this and that this is allowed to dry and set up. It's going to take anybody who messes with this some time to experience how it works, because it's you generally want to put it on and then let it sit. So as you know, we went ahead and painted these things, and I've done a little bit of rust on the graphite. That was done with an airbrush, and then we're going to go back, of course, and we'll do the panel line, which will make it look even more like. You can see the carriers, the wood carriers that we went ahead and painted earlier, and then the drum itself. So the drum is now sitting on the deck itself. And this is the Katie car we did earlier. So the load has actually been affixed. That's pretty much just simple gluing onto the deck, so I'm not going to go over that in intensity. The other car that we've glued onto the deck as well, as we went ahead and glued this car onto the deck, or this load onto the deck of the car. So we've got the really clean, nice load on an older car, which looks really good. And then you'll notice the rust that we've done underneath for the carrier, or the base of the load. So it looks really good as well on there. And of course we'll probably go back and do a little more weathering on that to make it look a little more realistic and make those two blend together. So this is the large transformer load, and one of the neat things about these loads is they actually have mounting points, if you can see them right up in here. And these mounting points are where the rods that tie the car down, or the load to the car, are located. And here's one I've already finished. You can see it here. So there's two rods that run up into those two holes up in that mount point. And then these rods are going to be slung down to the car and through holes in the car decks. So we're going to put all four of these on, and then we're going to put the entire load onto the car after these are affixed in place. This load's the same way. There's actually mounting points built into the load here. We've drilled holes through those mounting points, and then we've put the mounting rod in there and ACC'd those in place. So this load will also be mounted onto the deck with these. We will glue the load on the base, and then we'll hold it in with these as well. This load has been weathered, and it's going to be weathered a lot more, because obviously this load is our weathered load, which means that this transformer has been pulled from service in the field and is going back to the manufacturer to either be retired or to be refurbished. So it's going to be relatively heavily weathered with the panel line here in a bit. So we're just hand painting these feet sand colored so they look like a wood, basically. Wood blocking that they've shipped the car with. Taking time to do little details like this makes a huge difference in your model work. And I know it may seem like just a waste of time, but if you look at that, it looks really neat because you've got three colors on that small piece. You've got the blocking material down below, and you've got the load, and then you've got the strapping. And that all really, really adds to the complexity, the interest of the model. So now that we have these loads ready to go, we're just simply going to dip them in a little bit of ACC, and we're just going to place them right here on the deck like this. And that will get them ready for shipping. And this is exactly what the prototype did. You can load these in different places on the car. It really doesn't matter. It's just wherever the people that were loading the car felt like sticking them. And in this particular case, I'm going to stick both of them here on one end together. And there you go. And we're loaded out with those. Again, you can put them down here on this deck if you want. You can put them up here. You can put them any place you want. It doesn't really matter. The prototype railroads put them just any place, literally any place that they wanted to stick them. So what we're going to be doing here, by the way, Post-it notes or any of these little stick-it notes make a great place to marshal glue. And generally what I'll do is I'll have a little glue stick that I'll kind of bend something in like this so I can hold it in one hand while I'm working on this type of thing where I'm gluing things together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to slide it down into the car mount right here like this. And then before we do anything else, now that we have kind of a rough height up here, we're going to look at where that load actually fits, because we're going to bend it and stick it through the hole. So at this point I'm going to take this and I'm just going to cut it off right here like this. I'm going to grab a good pair of needle nose and I'm just going to make a right angle bend in it, and a very small right angle bend in it, and I'll show you here in a minute when I'm done. Just going to grab it, make a right angle bend in it. There you can see the bend. And then we're going to take that bend and we're going to actually just stick it through the hole in the car. Okay, so we've now finished the guy wires on both ends of the car. And normally a lot of times what will happen is they'll put an X pattern in here with two more. So we're going to liven this up a little bit. We're going to put an X pattern in, but we're going to mount them clear out here on the car. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take and we're actually going to drill holes just like they did in the prototype on the edge out here to make this more interesting. So again, I've got my drill bit. I'm going to crank it down really low so we don't burn anything. We don't want to burn through the plastic, and I'm going to just put a small hole right here and one right here. Okay, so you can see the X bracing now as well as the standard bracing, and it makes a really, really neat looking kind of load there. So that's what we're shooting for. There is one other thing I'm going to do. I'm actually going to take some ACC and I'm going to kind of put a little blob on these kind of midway in certain areas. And the reason I'm doing that is these rods that come down actually have turnbuckles in them, or they've got areas in them that they can tighten up, or the rods, and we're going to just use the ACC blobs to represent that. So when this is dried and it gets painted, you'll have those kind of turnbuckle looking things right in the middle of the X bracing there to make them look more realistic. So we've got all the tie downs in, we have them painted now, and I just did a quick kind of panel line weathering up here on top where the load is, and this is pretty well ready to go in and get its last coat of dull coat and be completed. So just doing a little bit of rusting, just a little bit of upper coat resting on everything. Again, using the panel line, it works really well. You can use the brush that comes with it. It would work just as well, but I'm using this big brush because you can actually move quicker because you can load your brush, and it just frankly covers more area more quickly, putting all that rust onto the support. So there you go. This will dry and the Katie car will be completed. So we're now going to weather this transformer. You know, we were talking about the older transformer. The wild thing about the panel emphasizer, or the panel line accent, is it's going to freak you out because, again, you just kind of glob stuff all over it like this, and then you put, really what makes it work is the thinner here. So you put it on, and then you put tons and tons of thinner on it, and the thinner just makes it kind of flow into all the cracks and crevices and everything. And it looks crazy right now, but when it dries, it actually works very well. It looks extremely realistic. Everything settles into the panel lines, which is, you know, why they call it panel line. So we're going to mount the transformer on the deck just like this, and several things you need to think about. Obviously, it doesn't have to be centered in the deck, but we want it close. So we want to kind of look at this point right here, this center pipe, and make sure that's kind of in the center. And on this end too, we want to make sure that the load is kind of centered out like this. So we're going to be affixing this to the deck with ACC or super glue. You can actually mount it on a deck in several different ways or several different methods. We're just going to use just a little teeny bit of ACC on both ends here, and then drop it onto the deck where it's fairly centered, and then take a look at all of our little indicators that I pointed out earlier to make sure that it is indeed where you're sitting. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make blocking for this. Blocking is basically pieces of material that are welded to the deck that keep the transformer from sliding back and forth. And so I have my scrap box of styrene shapes here. All kinds of things can be used to make blocking, such as this H column. A lot of times though, they'll just use angle, big pieces of angle. They'll weld it onto the deck so it's basically up against the load. So the next thing we're going to do with this car, it's very common in freight cars to have blocking, and what blocking is it's basically pieces of metal or wood or whatever that are mounted to the car that sit up against the load so the load can't shift, the base of the load can't shift. The guy wires are used to hold the load up above, but there's always blocking down below that actually holds or cradles the load. So in this case, we can use H column, we can use angle. So this is Plastdirect L, and this is what we're going to be using. But in order to keep from ruining the model detail-wise, we actually need to prep it and paint it before we put it onto the car, because it's going to be rusty metal and it's going to be real hard to paint on the car. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out just one stick of this, and we're going to cut it into the appropriate shapes, put them onto this, and paint them, and then we'll glue those onto the car, sliding them up to the load in the process. That allows a couple things to happen. First of all, the car can, the glue can dry on the car, and secondly, it allows us to paint these and get them on the car so they look really good. So I'm just using an X-Acto knife to literally just, I'm going to get one with a sharp blade, to literally just cut little pieces of this angle. This is what they're going to look like. And the nice thing is you don't really even have to measure this. When they're doing this type of stuff, they just quickly cut through stuff. So they're not measuring it really either. So they just need, generally we're going to have 2 on the end and 2 on each side, or 4 on each side. So 2 per end, 2 per side. And we're going to cut them, just kind of similar shape, but we're not going to take any time to really measure anything out. And then I'm going to just carefully just put them up here on this pieces of tape. We're going to take them over and paint them a rust color. We'll do a graphite first and then some rust on them, so they look like fairly new metal, but they have some rust on them. And that will get us prepped to affix the load to the car itself. Pieces in the paint booth, and again, graphite makes a really nice bare metal color. So we're going to go ahead and just paint these all graphite. And once that is done, we will quickly change paint colors and just add a little bit of rust to them. Super glue out and our little teeny piece of Post-it note. One of the easiest ways to handle small pieces of anything is to use your X-Acto knife. So literally put a sharp blade in and you can stab the piece. Just put a little bit of glue on it. And then we're going to move it over to the car. So we're going to go back in and we're going to run some guy wires. We're going to run them down to about here. And if you look on the deck of the car, there's some indented spots here. And we're going to drill right through those, and that'll take us to the car. Then we can run the guy wires up for the load. So you want to run your Dremel or whatever tool on its lowest setting. And that's what we run the guide wires through. So here's number 2 up. Same type of thing. Kind of bend it around and we'll slide it in the hole, glue it, and then pull it taut as well. Again, a little squirt of accelerator. Let it sit for a couple seconds, and then we're going to pull it down tight. So at this point, we've done all of the guy wires on the car, and you can tell it looks pretty cool with those on there. So basically, we're just going to run over the car real quick like this with the graphite. And if any that sticks below the car here, we're going to hit there too. If you've got spots like this particular car has a spot right here that gets pretty close to some piping, you can just slip a post-it note in there like that and hit these then, and then pull that back out.